affect your body and how treatment and the signs and symptoms and how treatment is can help you live a normal life, albeit that sort of devastating diagnosis. Stay tuned to Morning Express for that and more. If you have any questions, feel free to ask via Twitter or Facebook, and of course we shall be engaging you on the question of the day.
Absolutely. We'll also be looking at what's making headlines on the dailies, and we do know that one of the bones of contention that Senate has had for the last few days is the revenue allocation bill, which again did not see light of day. And this, of course, is after Senate went late into the night deliberating and debating that. We were expecting that we're going to have Senator Irungu Kangata, but past 11 p.m. they were still deliberating, and as a result he may not be able to come because he also would possibly be looking at giving us direction in terms of how that went. But we're going to be looking at what's making headlines in the dailies. But that question this morning would like to hear from you is, do you believe that the third county revenue sharing formula will eventually be passed? Do you believe the third county revenue sharing formula will eventually be passed? The hashtag is KTN Morning Express. If you'd like to tweet, she is at Trix Ingado. I am at Michael G. Gitonga. Do let us know what your thoughts are in that regard. And of course, we do know that it's been quite a debate and has been protracted for a while. And it's part of what we're going to be discussing right here with Honorable John Bunyasi, who's Member of Parliament for Nambale. As we look at what's making headlines, that's also one of the areas that we'd like to touch on. And good morning and welcome to the show, Honorable Bunyasi. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
All right, and straight to the dailies. And let's start off with some of those stories making headlines. And we'll start with the Standard, where we have cutting Knut down to size. This is, there's a question asked there by the Standard. Is it a sinking ship? Hardly a week after the High Court slammed brakes on him, DCI boss suffers yet another blow after prosecution guidelines, which he is opposed to, are endorsed by his bosses. What next for the daredevil cop is what the Standard is asking this morning. And Honorable Bunyasi, looking at what's happening with Knut, what are your thoughts on whether this is the right direction we should be taking, particularly at a time where the country is really hoping to fight corruption once and for all?
Thank you very much, Michael. Clearly, in jobs of this type, of the DCI, the Director of Criminal Investigation, the public prosecutor, and the courts on the other end, you can always reliably conclude that there will always be tensions. You're dealing with highly secretive, probably life and death situations. You're dealing with enormous pressures, influencers on the side. And so the relative speeds at which these three parts move may be at variance. And we have the EACC, I have not even put in the EACC.
Right.
I think that good models are where the police departments are relatively independent. You can't instruct the police what to do or what not to do. That does help a hell of a lot. Sometimes in this country you find that certain cases quickly run into sort of back on the interests of the power, those that are in power at all levels. And so, as well as the fact that in Kenya there's always seems to be an opportunity if you can, sort of grease your way. These are things that are sources of significant pressures. So I think it is not good for Kenya, for the Criminal Investigation Department to be cowed. I think they must have, just like the officers for public prosecutors do in other parts, other jurisdictions, other countries, they must have the freedom to know what to pursue and what not to pursue, guided only by the instruments of law that they work within.
Yes. Does it concern you and worry you when we have the Office of the Prosecutor, the ODPP, literally at loggerheads with DCI? Because you'd expect that they would work literally hand in hand, given the sensitivity, as you've mentioned, of the kind of job that they do.
It worries me a hell of a lot. I think it's completely degenerative, the sense that one will try and undercut the other. Of course, if the investigations are not good, DPP can't go anywhere. And if the DPP wants to take all the credit for prosecutions, the investigators might say you are leaving us out of the chain. I think it's a very, very unhealthy situation.
An unhealthy situation.
It's even bad too when they're totally in consonance, but they just need to work with relative consideration of what is good at the end of the day, and that is fairness and justice, even for Njiku.
Absolutely. And for you to get details of what that row is all about and the concerns that are being raised, it's in the Standard. The headline is Cutting Knut Down to Size. We also have a subheading on page 6, Knut's power under siege as DPP ratifies new rules on criminal cases. And the reason why this particular rules are raising eyebrows is because the DCI had actually said he was not for those rules, but now they have been ratified. It is also, questionable, or rather raises eyebrows again by virtue of the fact that he did not attend this particular session. But according to the authorities that be, the IG in particular, he says that there needs to be no reason for concern because he was attending other state duties. But there you go. That's the headline on the dailies. We also have another headline, or rather something that hits the headline in the front page, Twists and Turns as senators decide on county billions. And this, of course, has been going on for a while, and this was not reached a decision. But let me pick your mind as an economist, Mheshimiwa, on your thoughts on the two, sides of the revenue allocation that have been there. There is those who are supporting giving revenue based on land mass. There are those who are saying based on population. What are your thoughts?
Clearly, there is a midway, perhaps not quite in the middle, but there is another way, which is that, sure enough, population is important. It's the most important thing to look at. It's the human beings that you're dealing with. But on the other hand, you want to provide basic infrastructure. And it's cheaper to provide basic infrastructure in densely populated areas, such as roads, for example, or water, than in areas that are not densely populated. So that factor must be important. They're part of the republic. That's how we access all the corners of this republic. So allocations that deal, for example, with issues like infrastructure, education, because of either movement or the paucity of the lowness of population, the sparseness of the population, those must be taken into account. Why? Because even the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, rights to education are there, rights to health, rights to a livelihood, essentially. And you have to guarantee this for your citizens. It may cost you more at different points of the republic, but they have to be done. Therefore, in respect, very broadly speaking, in respect of this kind of formulae, it's that component of it that is going to, that is like now we call it the equal share, for example, that everyone needs to get as a minimum. And then above that, it can be nuanced by various factors, including population, including the size of the land, and certainly you can hear the cries out of big counties like Marsabit. From Marsabit to get education from to provide education all over their corners is extremely challenging, and therefore those conditions have to be considered. Just an example of Marsabit. So I don't think that the revenue formula in this format would really pass in our Senate. I would be very surprised if this formula were debated and agreed in the Senate. It's type of formula, not just this one. This one would not, in my view, it's be unlikely. And if it did, I think it will have major consequences, adverse consequences, and other formula of the same type. I heard somebody argue yesterday, just to conclude, and say, if you count, for example, the uptake of beds in hospitals as one of the indicators of what must then be maintained, what about places where there's no access to any bed at all, and people are in their homesteads? So obviously that is not, thinking that way doesn't help the republic.
And I guess one would need to reason, and maybe just to get your thoughts on this, as to which formula would favor development, because at the end of the day, yes, it is important to have population, but at the end of the day, part of what the counties that have been marginalized for a long time say is that the reason why they are behind the curve, so to speak, is because they have not had the revenue to develop. So we need one that is able to favor development and bring everybody, as it were, almost on the same level.
First of all, over time, people will decide where to settle based on climate, based on services, obviously, and on opportunities, and therefore providing equal opportunity across the republic is very useful.
Right.
But then the reality is that the costs of infrastructure in sparsely populated areas, in large land masses, is high. And I think what needs to happen is that in the national allocation of resources, not those going to the counties, counties should be seeing evidence that, in fact, the government is leaning towards providing more resources in areas that were previously not provided with good roads, adequate roads. And then the counties will feel some comfort that for things that are beyond us, since we have limited resources, then this is going to be taken care of by the national government. So let us just worry about that bit, which goes to basic services like water supply. And even if it is water supply, in some areas you can drill it. In other areas you have to bring it from far distances. That's where national government should come in. What sometimes is missing in this republic is that although we worry a lot about this share of 316 billion, for example, that's going to the counties, out of a budget of about 3 trillion, so it's just a little over, it's just about maybe 10 point something percent of the budget. The 90%, we do not put it under the same level of rigor to say, what about its distribution? Is it, for example, taking care of essential long-term expenditures that are beyond the capacity of counties, irrespective of how much you give counties to do? Then if counties were clear in their minds that issues like infrastructure, issues around health, for example, now with the COVID-19, we know certain minimum basic investments, if those were being partially supported, or if there was a recall mechanism, a recourse mechanism, in which you can call on the national government if you face exceptional circumstances and get additional funding, because that's in the interest of the public interest, they would have a bit more comfort. But to give counties the level of funding they do, and to expect that they will have taken care of all these big issues, water supply if you don't have it locally, tarmacking your roads, which you need to do actually to be able, for example, provide access across the country, across your area, across the country. If you take place like Lamu, with the allocation they can get, yes, they can probably take care of water to some extent. They can take care of the tail end of the health services, but they have benefited a lot, for example, from LAPSET.
Right.
Now, if there were those kinds of extraneous to the county investments that were occurring, it gives comfort to the county to begin to think seriously and say, okay, within our own borders, what are the things that we can actually do? Because somebody else will take care of the beyond our borders. That does not always come across very well. And as you know, as I conclude, one of the problems we have, our budgets are done incrementally.
Right.
You get a basic draft, it comes in, it's reviewed. Next time you see the next version, it's completely changed, new things have come in. And there's never a time to step back and say, hey, then, what does it mean for what we are going to pass in relative to what we committed ourselves to do? Because the commitment is what looks at the long-term, aligns policy, sets goals, and so on. So here there is that tendency to be in a rush at the end, and I think there are too many elements trying to get the budget together.
All right, and maybe just to have clarity, there's also the question of counties and how they benefit from the resources that they have locally. For example, you have the areas like Masai Mara, where in Narok, where they should benefit from wildlife and tourism. You have the coastal region that should benefit from the port. And what share goes to national government? What share goes to that area to ensure that they maintain that? Your thoughts on how this needs to be done? As we look at an article on page 7 of The Nation, that experts say the formula favors developed regions, where you'd have the likes of Kiambu that are densely populated, however, are more developed. It would be looking like they favor that. And maybe just to quote what one of the economists, David D, says, he says that if tribal supremacies feel that intolerable, there is always the alternative to a full federal system. Mombasa and Lamu can keep their ports. Turkana gets developed through oil resources. Do you think that's rather radical?
First of all, to go where you started on your comment, which is absolutely a critical comment at this moment in Kenya. Fortunately for areas Narok has an arrangement with the Masai Mara Reserve and other conservancies there, where they collect revenues.
Right.
And I think they get to keep some of the revenues. I just don't remember exactly the ratio that they keep.
What the ratio is.
Yeah, they collect the revenue. The principle should be definitely, if you host the resource, you must have some certain rights to it. After all, you want that resource, if it is the Mara or the port, to support the development of other sectors in the area, in health, education. And we can equal in that respect. However, they will not take 100%. How much they take, this normally should be negotiated. So if Narok was cry foul and say we are not keeping enough of the revenue, I think they need to listen to that. For example, things like higher education in Narok. There's earnings of the Masai Mara can support university education, technical education, and health, and so on. And that way diversify opportunities for the community. But they won't get to keep everything. But there are other areas like the Taita Taveta that are complaining that they're not getting any share, even though 2/3 of their landmass is in the park. Those are things that need to be looked at. The port in Mombasa is particularly controversial. Clearly, that's a resource at the coast and should support the coast. Must be one way in which you can develop the coast. But because the resources are derived in a way that derives from trade and other services, national services, that money should also go to the national government. And it does go to the national government. I think that where the balance should lie is not an entirely mathematical economic question. It's something to be negotiated. Now, which way it leans, if it leans too much on national government, you obviously are going to kill the opportunities for area development
that are there. And eventually it would also, kill the resource that's coming to the national government if it is not maintained and looked after. So there you go.
Absolutely.
And well, experts say that new formula favors a developed region. Do get yourself a copy of the Daily Standard, and The Nation. They do have that particular article covered quite extensively. And of course, we're going to wait and hear how Senate is going to go about this as they continue to debate. But let's look at other stories. On page 3 of the Standard, we have City Hall wrangles messier as Elachi roped into Sonko and Badi turf wars. Now, many of us will remember that Governor Mike Sonko handed over certain responsibilities and duties to the national government, which gave and paved way for the NMS, Nairobi Metropolitan Service, which is under the Director General, Badi. But that has brought all manner of eventualities and scuffles. And what we see now on page 3 of the Standard is one of them, with yesterday some of the MCAs going to literally take over. But maybe away from the dramatic events that were taking place yesterday, to get your thoughts, Mheshimiwa, on why, first of all, this is such high octane kind of politics, and we see all this happening, yet what Nairobi residents want is just service.
It is true. This is indeed high octane sort of comedy. And yet, yes, Nairobi, which has got the largest constituent population, the citizens do want basic services. And they aren't asking for heaven. They're actually asking for clean streets. They're asking for garbage removal. They're asking for clean water supply. Those basic. They're asking to get opportunities to trade and do business so they can sustain their livelihoods. They're asking for the usual things that should be provided. I think that there must be something that probably most of us do not understand, nor do I would say. There must be something that we all are missing.
Right.
That's leading to, and you can see a bit of it coming out when you hear the press statements from the competing side. Somebody stands up and says there used to be a 10% allocation that is no longer now coming. That's creating problems. So that's what's happening then. We should ask ourselves. It's absolutely unfortunate. I think that the national government, the national capital should be run better, but the solution is not to nationalize the capital, to make the capital runs directly by the central government. We know how difficult it is to run things out of central government.
Correct.
We just need a clean city, in terms of its politics. And one reason of this is easier said than done, but one way of doing it is to prosecute petty crimes, small crimes, and big crimes. There is a tendency to have a mafia-style thing. Things happen in corners of the city that other corners of the city do not have. You have people who collect taxes and charges at bus stops or in estates or in construction sites. This is all copied from the book, as it were, with the mafia in the 30s, for example, in the US, in New York and other places. So I think that in modern day, we should be able to pin it down a bit better, and you would expect that the judicial processes should function more effectively here. What I think should not happen, Michael, is the common scene at City Hall, that each time they have a dispute, they throw chairs, they are fighting. Our nice ladies are out there,
literally
throwing
having
punches.
physical fist fights.
Yes, that kind of scene, I think, should really be discouraged.
Should be discouraged.
Yes.
But your thoughts, Mheshimiwa, on whether it was the right move to, have NMS come in and take over, given that we had the leadership from Governor Sonko for, well, let's say 3 years, and not much really seems to have been happening, yet we were told that he was going to remove the cartels. Do you think it was a good move to have Nairobi Metropolitan Service, at least to take over for the rest of the time?
No, I do not think it was. I do not think that we had an emergency of a war type where you say that the civilian services can't function, so we bring in military. I think that was absolutely unnecessary. I did not know if it was related to the politics of the day. But I think the other way to look at it is that if you have these county governments, for example, the governors, and you find that the MCAs are unhappy because this service or that service not being rendered, or this bias or that being exercised, we must allow the legal systems to work through, including censures of these leaders by the assemblies and so on. On the other hand, you know that people are getting very impatient and very nervous, I must say, almost, whenever there is an impeachment motion of a governor. But no, that's how the system should work. And clearly it goes to the Senate, for better or for worse, they say no or yes, and they go back and start again. There are processes that don't have fists and physical blows, and people don't have to die for that process. I think in the case of Sonko, he should have been pushed to the wall in respect of how best to run the county using processes set out in the laws, in the constitution, in the law. And the assembly members of Nairobi are pretty well informed people overall. So if they sense something is not right, they should be allowed to push it all the way they can do. That would not have needed to bring in the national government. I don't think they're doing things right. There are areas in which military uniform works really well, and situations, but I think in situations of this nature, where you have to deal with public opinion, listen to the public opinion, apply the law in relation to that, I think are not being observed. I don't think it was the best move to make, but Sonko did sign on a document.
Absolutely.
While I presume the only thing I'd had that day is his cup of tea or something, so he must have been of
sober mind.
Sober mind.
Well, he claims that he was under the influence.
Now he says that, and I guess that also under the law, I don't know if there are any escape clauses. Michael, I have not looked at the document. I don't know if there are any escape clauses, and if they were, let him exercise those escape clauses. But it's not a good way to do so. That one night you think you'll do A, B, C, D, the following day you change your mind. That's also is a problem.
Absolutely. And well, maybe just as we conclude on that before we take a break, your thoughts on leadership, because for us as Kenyans and as Nairobians, really, this should advise us on the choices we make for leaders, because at the end of the day, here we are facing a pandemic, and looking at the counties, even for example, we have some counties that have managed to prepare themselves in case of an upsurge, which of course is expected for COVID-19, but there are other counties that are lagging behind. But generally, your thoughts on how this should advise us come 2022 on how we go to the ballot?
First of all, I think, you characterized it very well indeed. There are challenges on leadership. I'm sometimes disappointed when I find that the solutions being proposed are that we should raise the minimum qualifications of education to solve that. That helps if the difference between illiteracy or barely literate. But for people who have graduated from high school and educational systems and have experienced the world one way or another, they can be very effective legislators, both at the county level and the national level and in the Senate. Sometimes you look at the quality of debate, the depth of the issues being discussed, and people with that education can grasp it very well. I think what is lacking is that our social, the norms the things that we have made normal, I think is part of our problem. People get away with things, as little as, for example, borrowing from interest, or as little as bribing to get a contract, or as big as not fully doing what is required in the contract, but getting full payment. You do half delivery, full payment. You build a road partially and badly, and you're still paid, and so on. There are things in our society that I think we need to clean, so that the governance in city halls also then will follow suit. Governance, even in the national government, will also then follow suit. There should be nobody who then creates authority around himself or herself by virtue of association with the system. So I really think that when the law begins progressively, and I think we are getting there slowly, we are seeing certain high-profile cases. We're also seeing some small cases being prosecuted. But I think we must follow through. If a building collapses, what do the parastatals that are responsible, how are they punished? What about the contractor and the owner, perhaps? But the people who are directly involved in it, how are they punished? It just goes off and nothing happens after a while, gets off the radar, and then something else happens elsewhere. We have to clean up this mess.
The whole system. Yeah. All right, Mheshimiwa, we're going to take a short break. I'd like us to take a short break. It's now 27 minutes after 7. We'll come back and look at a few more stories that are making headlines right here on the dailies. But a quick reminder of that question this morning. Do you believe the third county revenue sharing formula will eventually be passed? Do you believe the third county revenue sharing formula will eventually be passed? This is Morning Express. Do let us know what your thoughts are on that particular question of the day. We take a break. When we come back, we'll look at a few more stories that are making headlines on the dailies.
This is KTN News.
When it comes to information on agribusiness, there's only one place